Hey, it's John from Adults Have Toys Too. So recently I did a review of the Tokina 33mm 1.4 on Fujifilm, but exciting development. Tokina actually saw the review and they sent me a review sample of the new 56mm 1.4. So I have not opened this, I haven't seen inside yet, but let's see what they sent. atx-m 56mm 1.4 for Fujifilm X-Mount, with, of course, Tokina 3-year warranty. So there's that, atx-m 56mm 1.4 with the clickless aperture ring. On the X-Mount system, let's go for a walk and maybe get some shots.
So Tokina finally finished their trinity of fast prime lenses by releasing the 56mm f1.4. It joins the 33mm f1.4, which you're looking at me through, and the 23mm f1.4. So as you saw in the intro, I was very excited to get this in the mail, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, before I decided on the 33mm, I was actually looking at the 56mm Viltrox lens for this talking head segment, but then I realized I wanted a little bit of a wider angle. And two, this is the first time I've had a review sample provided by a company, which is really cool. But that being said, I want to be clear. This review sample is going back to Tokina after the review, and I don't receive any compensation, and I am not being sponsored by Tokina. So everything I say here is my view alone, and Tokina does not have the opportunity to review this video before it goes live. You're seeing it for the first time along with them. But while we talk about the lens, why don't we get a little bit closer and actually look through the lens. All right, so here we are, exactly the same distance, exactly the same settings, same shutter speed, same aperture, just 56mm instead of the 33mm. How do I look at this about 80mm equivalent kind of portrait lens for this sort of shot? Like I said, I was tempted to go with this focal length for these talking head shots, but you tell me, which do you prefer? Do you like this tighter, more intimate view, or do you prefer the wider 33mm? So while we're looking through the lens here, let's talk a little bit about it. If you want to hear a little bit more about Tokina themselves, go ahead and take a look at my 33mm f1.4 review here. Long story short, Tokina is a Japanese company that's been making lenses for a long time. But this set of fast lenses is actually contracted out to another Chinese OEM who makes them for Tokina, and a very similar lens for Viltrox. While I haven't personally tested the Viltrox, I highlighted a few of the differences in my 33mm f1.4 review. And I will say, some of the issues that the Viltrox lenses have shown in other reviews, such as chromatic aberration, I haven't really noticed here in the Tokina lens. So there's a possibility that while the optical formula is the same, they may be using a different optical coating. So let's take a closer look at the hardware. So here's the Tokina 56mm f1.4 on my Fujifilm X-T4. It's an all-metal lens, seems very solidly built, with a smooth aperture ring. So when I say a smooth aperture ring, I'm just talking about the motion of the ring itself. The actual aperture itself is controlled by software. So when you move the ring, it tells the camera what aperture you want, and then the camera goes to it. So you're not going to have smooth aperture transitions while in video mode, but that's the case with the Fujifilm lenses as well. When I place it next to the 33mm, you can see they're exactly the same size, which is nice for swapping lenses on a gimbal or somewhere you need to keep it the same size. From the front, you can see that the 56mm has a larger front element, though the filter size is the same. And from the back, you can see that spot where the USB port would be on the Viltrox lens. I still haven't gotten a clear answer if you can update the firmware on these lenses. If it did, you would have to do it through the contacts in the camera itself. Both of these lenses come with metal lens hoods, which is nice. The 33mm has a pedal-shaped one, where the 56mm with the longer focal length just has a barrel-shaped one. The big selling point for this lens is the fact that it's an autofocus third-party lens on Fuji X-Mount. So here I am manually focusing the lens, and you can see that the focus transitions are very smooth, and there's very little focus breathing. If you look at the lights, you can see that the bokeh balls are nice and smooth without any hints of onion ringing. A common complaint about third-party autofocus X-Mount lenses is that they don't respect Fujifilm's autofocus settings. Here you can see it set to fast with no lock-on, and the focus snaps immediately into place, which is what you'll see on most autofocus lenses. Here I have the lock-on set to strong, so you'll see that the focusing is still fast, but it holds before it changes focus, which is what you would expect when you change that setting. And now I have the autofocus set to slow, and you see, when I transition from one area to the other, the focus goes smooth and slow, just like you would expect on a native Fujifilm lens. So as far as I can tell, this works exactly the same as any native Fujifilm lens. Like most of the Fuji prime lenses, it doesn't have any optical image stabilization, but it does talk to a camera that has IBIS, like this X-T4. So here's image stabilization off, and now with the internal IBIS in the X-T4 talking to the Tokina lens. Much more stable. So while we're here, this is a portrait lens, so let's take a look at a portrait of me. And this is actually the 33mm f1.4 at 1.4. And while we're not looking at this lens for this review, you can see that it does a pretty good job. So let's step a little bit closer. This is actually the XF 16 to 80mm lens from Fujifilm at about 50mm, just as a comparison point for the 56mm. If we jump into 150%, you can see that there's a great level of detail, which is what you would expect from the Fuji lens. Jumping over to Tokina 56mm, you can see there's still great detail, and this is at f1.4, where you would expect a little bit of softness. Coming out, you can see that nice bokeh in the background. Stopping down to f4 to kind of compare it to the Fuji lens, you can see that the sharpness does increase a little bit, which is especially noticeable when you come in nice and close. So let's put me next to me. This is at 100% scale, and on the left we have the Tokina, and on the right the Fujifilm. So what do you think? Overall, just around the house, it's fast, fun, easy to use, and makes some pretty nice photos. But playing around with it here in my little makeshift studio is one thing. It's another thing entirely to take it on a trip and see how it fares. So, let's try it. Alright, welcome to the beautiful beach town of Ventura, California. We're out here with the atx-m 56mm 1.4. We're going to get some shots, maybe a little video, and we're going to be using the 1.4 56mm exclusively. So it'll be a little bit challenging since it's a bit tight for walking around town, but let's see how it does. We start our day at the farmer's market. The lighting was kind of diffuse with some cloud cover, so all the colors are a little bit muted, but you can see here we get some nice separation and depth of field, and the sharpness is actually pretty nice as well. Feel free to pause or go back if there's anything that you want to look at a little bit closer. The lighting was good for the wide aperture. Let me use this at f4, but also bringing it all the way down to f2 and kind of blowing out the background. We bought some stuff from some nice people, but then we moved on to downtown. Apparently while I was at the farmer's market, I should have picked up a super mushroom. But oh well. This seems to really excel as a portrait lens, which is how it's marketed, but that's really not the only way you could be using it. The main street of downtown Ventura has been closed off recently, which has been nice to be able to walk around and visit the local businesses. And not just for the people. There was dogs and more dogs all up and down the main street. All of them enjoying the beautiful weather and friendly faces. But these happy pups weren't the only faces we saw. At times remembered, there was another sort of face. Head down these halls alone if you dare. But be ready. A portrait lens is a portrait lens, despite the subject not being quite human. So be sure to take a close look and make sure the details are to your liking, because they may be the last thing you ever see. All right, that's enough of that. Let's get back outside to the main street, down by City Hall, and take a look at some of the details you can actually get out of this lens. It actually is a very sharp and a very flexible lens for a lot of different circumstances, as long as you're okay with getting that little bit of extra telephoto. We can look at some more of the details down by the harbor and see how it works with some more harsh lighting. Here's some high contrast, and I don't really see much in the way of chromatic aberration. And taking a look at a Sunstar here at a tight aperture, you can see a little bit of rainbowing, but it's pretty well controlled. If we go a little bit closer to these tile work, you can take a look at some of the sharpness that this lens will give you, even towards the corner at 100%. And here's 100% at the center as well. Overall, the trip was full of color and full of photographic opportunities. We had a great time, and of course, it's nice to top things off by visiting some of the local breweries. If you like what you've been seeing so far, please don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if you'd like to see some more. So in order to wrap this all up, we're going to have to kind of place this where it is in the market. So if we're looking for competition for this Tokina, one would be the Fujifilm 56mm f1.2 at the same focal length with a little bit brighter of an aperture. By all accounts, it's an amazing lens, but considerably more expensive and considerably older autofocus hardware that's noisy and slow. Also from Fujifilm would be the 50mm f2 lens, which is at a similar price point with a little bit dimmer of an aperture, but comes weather sealed, which is a nice benefit. Fujifilm also has a 50mm f1 lens, which is very expensive and is very big and heavy and is for special applications. Outside of Fujifilm, Zeiss also has an autofocus lens in a similar focal length that also has some macro features. I find that one very interesting, and I haven't had a chance to try it yet, though it does come in at a significantly higher price point than this Tokina. And then of course there's the Viltrox 56mm f1.4, which on almost all metrics is almost identical to this 56mm f1.4 at a little bit lower of a price point. So I think for me personally, I'd be between this Tokina and the Fujifilm 50mm f2, which are both in about the same price range. The reason I would pick this over the Viltrox is because I'd like to support Tokina a little bit more than I would Viltrox. The 56mm 1.2 Fuji seems very interesting, and if they updated it with newer autofocus hardware, I think that would be a great contender, even at the higher price. But Zeiss, if you're watching, I'm more than happy to try that one out and see how it fares compared to this Tokina. But really, for the price and what you're getting, I can't imagine that you would be disappointed with this lens. So while I am sending this back to Tokina, it is kind of in the back of my head now, and I'm thinking about it. But I do have another lens on the way that I personally purchased that you might find very interesting. So if you want to check that out, be sure to subscribe. But until next time, never stop having fun.